It's easier to start that way.
Hello, good afternoon for another IMPAKT TV. My name is Marijke Hessles. I'm your host this afternoon, and I'm sitting here with Zachary Formwalt, one of the artists who's presenting their work at IMPAKT 2022, where the theme or the big question that's the core of the festival is the curse of smooth operations. We'll be talking about the work of Zachary, which is called An Industry and Its Irreplaceable Medium. So, Zachary, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. A little bit. Today is kind of a packed day, so
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a
well
panel.
Rested.
There's a panel after this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
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 So a lot of reflecting on your work. The curse of smooth operations. What do you understand? How do you understand this theme?
Yeah, the curse of smooth operations. I mean, for me, it is very much about this, the kind of trying to understand maybe how when things are working, they're maybe to understand failure on the level of totality instead of like in the little mistakes in something,
right?
But rather that that there is something systemically, and that often lies in the future, I think too. So it's very much tied to a kind of I think like we tend to think of failures in the present.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you start thinking on the level of some kind of totality of system, then there's often a lurking kind of impending failure, and yeah, that's maybe the curse of smooth operations.
Right, right. Yeah, so that's looking towards the future. Your work kind of starts in the past. So maybe you can explain to us a little bit of what it is that you're presenting here. Your work, An Industry and Its Irreplaceable Medium. So it's also a title that already invokes a couple of questions. What industry are we talking about?
Yeah. Well, I think both of these terms, both industry and medium, I mean, okay, so originally the title was to be an exemplary industry and its irreplaceable medium, but it became a little bit too much of a mouthful and yeah, it felt, I actually wanted people to ask first, what is this medium? Or I thought that was what it would put the emphasis on. Maybe paradoxically, because that's the thing that's defined a little bit through irreplaceable. But the industry in question is it's double. It's on the one hand, it's a kind of something that has not really a single great name, but you could call it the animal industry. You could call it the meat industry, the meat packing industry, but it goes much further. I think meat packing is better. That's typically what they call it in the U.S. And what's better about that is that it kind of suggests that there's something other than meat at stake, which is really, that's always been a part of the animal industry, at least industrial. Well, yeah, obviously industry, but when we think like from the 19th century, mid-19th century forward, the animal industry has really been able to survive in a way, not so much through the sale of what we think of as the primary products, meat, but all of what the industry tends to call byproducts. But it's on the byproducts that the profit margins are really realized.
Right.
So this is meat in a way is sold below market value if you were just to sell meat, but by managing to kind of use every part of the animal, as the industry will often describe its own practice, the profits are able to be made with relatively low-priced meat.
So these byproducts, I mean, the name is not right then. I mean, they're kind of like the main products.
Yeah.
So what are these products?
Yeah, it's all kinds of stuff. I mean, that gets to what the medium is in this work. What one of the media is, and one of those is gelatin. Gelatin is used in so many things. In this project, I'm looking or using especially film, which chemistry-based film, analog film, which is basically. Now it is a layer of plastic or polyester that supports a thin layer, or many thin layers if we're talking about color, but if it's black and white, it's just one, of gelatin emulsion. So the light-sensitive particles that we think of as the kind of primary material of photography, these are suspended in a rendered animal remains, basically, usually from cattle. So that's one thing, and gelatin's used on all kinds of stuff. So we think that, like, okay, in moving away from analog film, that you might get away from it, but in any kind of printing of digital media, there's usually some kind of gelatin treatment or glue sizing of the paper. Some of the inks contain these things. Basically, it's kind of difficult it's nearly impossible to say that any commodity is completely free of the animal industry.
Right.
I mean, at some point, most things have some kind of animal product involved in the process of production. Whether it actually has that material in it in the end, that whether you're actually touching animal remains is questionable. But at some point in the process, like clarification of drinks, for example, if you have
wines, beers.
Exactly. Yeah. When they're filtered, then usually there's some kind of gelatin or something involved there that makes all the sediment kind of bind together and then is filtered out. Yeah. So there's a lot of also technical equipment and all these kind of things. There's usually some point in the if you Google like, is my phone vegan or something like that, you'll find out. You'll get this answer really quickly. Yeah, I mean, and they usually can't point to where exactly it is, but you definitely can't. It's very difficult. That's one of the problems with the Fairphone and why it's so expensive. Part of the reason.
Bypass that part of the process.
To certify that it isn't, to really, because so much of production, and this is part of the end industry, and thinking of like kind of exemplary industry. So you could kind of take any industry and describe it in some of these terms. Right. That industries work through the supply chains that kind of obscure previous moments of production. So what comes in as an input is like a raw material, but that raw material was produced. There really is no raw material, even if you're extracting it from the earth. That whole process of extraction will involve all kinds of. So there's no moment where a raw material comes out of nature, and that doesn't happen.
Magically knocks on our door to be used for in a cycle of process. So this is your research. This is kind of like the focal point of your research, and then you translated it into a work. So you're like an artist, researcher, a teacher. You also just told me. How do you make that translation to then a work, and what kind of work should we imagine with this? It kind of course, these things like
vary project to project, but I think, of course, I should speak specifically about this project now. One thing that is kind of in common with them is that there is this sort of search for form throughout the whole process. I mean, they're at a certain moment, I figure it out, or make some decision, basically, that okay, we're going to use this, and then kind of go forward from that point. But it takes a while for me to figure out what the form will be. And like this project started off as a commission from a group at the that were on a Mellon Fellowship at the Gray Center for Arts and Inquiry at the University of Chicago.
Right, that's where it was originally commissioned.
Yeah, they commissioned film work.
Okay.
That was dealing in some way with the legacy of animal industry in Chicago and kind of contemporary traces of it.
Specifically Chicago.
Yeah, specifically Chicago, but how this relates more broadly, more generally to like the aesthetics of capital.
Yeah.
How capital appears. And so if we take the meatpacking industry, there's certain ways in which, if you take any industry, as I kind of mentioned earlier, that you can sort of start to describe industry in general and start to get an understanding of what is the same across what seems like very different kinds of production processes. I mean, they're all within, societies dominated by the capitalist mode of production. They will all be driven by profit ultimately, and reporting to shareholders or owners if it's not, publicly held or whatever. So this kind of drive for profit is something that is going to manifest differently in different industries, like what the actual decisions and whatnot are made. But there's that's definitely like something that determines decision making within these industries. But yeah, now I'm off the topic of my own decision making and how to realize this in some kind of
But what I think is interesting in your work is that you the form and the research are entangled in the sense that it's you're using the actual film in order to confront us about what is on the film and what the film is made of. So it's like there's this interconnectedness where I can imagine that kind of came organically, but you say it was originally commissioned as a film.
Yeah.
So can you explain to us a little bit how it went from a film based on this research and then towards something more of an installation?
Yeah.
Because it is an installation at the moment, right? It's at the IMPAKT Center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's three main components in the installation. There's this video essay, which is the work that was really commissioned by this group in Chicago.
Yeah.
And then there is 100 meters of 16 millimeter film that is projected on a loop. And that film, what you see in that film is part of what is called Bubbly Creek in Chicago, which is a branch of the Chicago River. It's the part of the South Fork. And it's a body of water that the meatpacking industry dumped its waste into, like waste animal remains.
Still does?
No, it doesn't anymore. There's not much industry left there.
Okay.
They still have a big rendering facility, and I think there's one slaughterhouse still, and a few. There are some meatpacking places, but it's very small.
It's not so centered. It's not like the.
Yeah, it's not anything, and there are no stockyards. That was the big thing that really defined it, was this massive, huge area where animals were held before they were purchased by the companies there, the large meatpacking companies, and slaughtered and processed it. But anyway, so there are kind of two sites in the work. There's one that is really in the video essay central, and that is this vault of the central bank that the meatpacking industry in Chicago used to store the money that they would pay out, the cash that they would pay out for these, millions of dollars a day for, thousands of pigs and cattle and whatnot. And then in the film, what you see, and you see this also in the beginning and end of the video essay, but in the film it's a loop of this surface of Bubbly Creek, where all this waste material that the industry produced was being dumped up until the early 20th century. I mean, they were still dumping stuff, but part of the drive of the meatpacking industry is this thing, like I mentioned earlier, that the profit margins are kind of possible through the usage of more and more parts of the animal, basically. So decreasing the amount of waste.
Yeah.
Or you could say decreasing the amount of direct waste, like waste that what they release as...
Well, I mean, it stays in the chain otherwise, right? And
Yeah. So it's to keep it in the commodity form, basically, because
Yes.
if you dump it into the river, it's no longer in the commodity form. It will eventually become waste. Like,
Yes.
I mean, if we think of like the overwhelming amount of objects that we...
I mean, that phone will, in the end up somewhere.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, as waste.
So it's not that so that's also a kind of misconception, I think, that is perpetrated by the industry and by a lot of industries, that these kind of recycling programs and this using all parts of whatever.
Closing the cycle.
Yeah. I mean, that's it's basically just being able to commodify more and more of this. It's commodifying it on the way to the waste heap, basically.
Right.
But anyway, so this Bubbly Creek is interesting now because it's a site where that technological progress of the industry in reducing its direct waste and keeping more parts of the animal in the commodity form, where you can see that having an effect on the local environment. Because less and less of this stuff was dumped into the water, and at a certain point it was made illegal for them to dump there, and there was a lot of illegal activity around all this. But even if you keep it strictly within legal behavior, you very much see this kind of decrease of that. But the effects, like we know with climate in general, effects, they take a long time to work themselves out.
Right.
And in the case of this Bubbly Creek, there's still bubbles coming up on the surface.
There's bubbles
today.
coming up.
Yeah, and these bubbles are from decomposing animal remains on the floor of the creek. There's meters deep of this kind of sludge that is decomposing animal remains. That there have been surveys done to try to restore it, and they have kind of given up on that, actually.
Right.
Because there's just so much of it still. So you don't see these big. There's a famous description that Upton Sinclair gives in The Jungle, which is 1906, and there he describes chickens walking out on the surface because it's so thick, and these bubbles that would be like a meter in diameter, and this kind of thing that you don't see now.
God, yeah.
It's not, and it doesn't smell like an open sewer, but it's.
And it's still this physical manifestation of basically history, or presence in a way. It's just like it's hidden, but it's still representing something, and I think that's also a parallel with how what your work does. You use the film also to kind of represent the almost invisible but still very physically manifestation of these commodities as you call them, right? Yeah.
And I think with the film of Bubbly Creek too, that what you get there is you have this double invisibility. You have you have a relative, like a scale there, so you can see the bubbles if you look. And if you know this story, then you will understand that is in some form an animal product.
Yes.
That it comes out of this industrial processing of animals. And what you won't see is the gelatin that is holding that whole image together, which is also a contemporary, a much more recently... remains of much more recently living animals that have been industrially processed.
Yeah.
So you get this kind of what seems like a obscure relation to animal form, and these bubbles is actually not even close to the sort of intangibility of the gelatin in the film that you're watching, which is sort of it's one of its main technical properties is that you don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's why it's used. And so do you regard that as like the intentionally hidden part of the process?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to reflect on the hiddenness of these things
Yeah.
within, within our own experience of the world.
Yeah.
So I think it's, but rather than, I mean, from the outset of this project, even though it was going to be dealing with this subject, I did not want to, very quickly I decided I'm not going to have images of animals at all, not in the forms we recognize. Yeah. So there would be animals everywhere in it, but the only way to like be able to actually understand that, so even like the ruin of the animal industry that's in the film, there were no animals, at least not livestock or these things, that ever came into contact with these rusted out surfaces that you see of these abandoned vaults. Yeah. It was just the money, even when they were, just constructed and when they were at the height of their functioning. They were, by definition, these sites where animals would not enter. But it's also the site where the whole process kind of becomes possible. It's where the possibility of purchasing thousands of pigs a day is only possible by having this vault with all of this money in a single place that can be handed out to the. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's. The invisibility of these things, I feel like this is part of the exemplary character. This word that got taken out of the title, the exemplary industry. Yeah. This is looking at this one particular industry is kind of a way of reflecting in some way on these invisibilities in all kinds of industries. Right. In that sense, that we should be able to see it all around us in like all chains of production, probably. Which it almost sounds to me like your research is kind of resonating with archaeology. Do you regard your work as a form of maybe archiving or archaeology? Yeah, I mean, I like to work with archives and usually do with most of the projects. There are some archives that come into play. In this one, there's a couple of archives, but one of them is the Eastman Kodak archive, their gelatin files, which is something that I found out through this book that I read by Nicole Shukin called Animal Capital. She had done work in those archives, and so I was able to go there and kind of that was pointing me in that direction. Yeah. And they were quite interesting, but also kind of seeing to get more to the archaeological aspect or something, seeing like urban landscapes as having this kind of having these traces of having these ruins in them that kind of refer to moments that we feel like we've gone beyond, but that we haven't. I mean, this is also like this thing that it's the idea that we live in a sort of post-industrial world. I think is kind of a real illusion to some extent. So why is that an illusion? Well, I think, and this actually, there's another book that was really important for me in the research for this, which is a book called Porkopolis that was written by an author named Alex Blanchette. And there he had really worked for a couple of years in, I think it was a couple of years or a year and a half or something like that, in the pig industrial pig farms. And he makes this observation several times there, this idea that we're sort of in some post-industrial world is really there are particular places in the world where it may seem like that, but actually those places are surrounded by industrial production, and if anything, we live in a more intensely industrialized society at this moment in history than ever before. I mean, pretty much anything around us has been produced industrially.
Yeah.
So all of the tools that, or the phones, all this kind of stuff, the TVs, whatever, even the networks for they connect all this stuff together. All of that stuff, all that physical infrastructure is, involves an intense amount of industrial production.
Right. So where does that idea come from, that we're post-industrial?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes from the experience of work that for a lot of us, we are not involved in industrial production.
So the position of the worker has changed. Our the whole factory settings and stuff have changed. So that's why we think maybe.
But there's still like tons of factory labor.
Labor has changed. Yeah.
It's funny actually. Because we also think of factory labor as being, and it often is, and especially in the meatpacking industry, it's very racialized. It's often immigrant labor, and that's been also in Chicago. That was from the beginning, really. Yeah. It was immigrant laborers, and you see as like waves of immigration came in, and they were seen as non-white. The longer they were there, they became white, and new waves of immigration from other places came in, and those people were seen as not white. Yeah. And and then especially you had a lot of African Americans coming from the South during the Great Migration in the 1930s and even before, up through the 1960s. And in Chicago, that was huge. Yeah. And so we think of like industrial labor as, I think there is a kind of tendency to think of industrial labor as the labor done by others. And it's kind of, but there's a funny anecdote about this, which is I was just meeting with a student on Monday and talking about his thesis, and it just came up that he said, I was working 2 days last week at the factory. And it was like, at the factory? Do you actually work at the? Are you calling the school the factory, or do you actually work at a factory?
Or is it like a hip New York club or anything? Yeah.
But he works at a factory in Amsterdam. Yeah, it's even in the city, or maybe it's on the outskirts or something. I don't remember. But anyway, it's like they make pipes or something. I don't remember what it was. But it's so.
It kind of resonates with I was just talking with Florian and Erik about their perspective on these smooth operations, that there's also this tendency of keeping a myth surrounding, well, specifically like modern technology, where we kind of hide the human in the process. Mm-hmm. So we act like there's a lot of agency, or like there's a standalone side on a lot of technology where it isn't. And I kind of see that with this as well. We're kind of removing a really big part of the human labor. Mm-hmm. So why is that? Why do we do this?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's the whole thing. It's like removing, it's also a process, this also relates very problematically to concepts of human versus animal and these kind of things, and who does what kind of labor, and who does the labor of working with animals as being somehow on some level closer to those animals than we are. And I mean, so this kind of removal from, abstraction from, alienation from these things could be seen as a kind of loss, or as a kind of some sort of personal law, something that some kind of experience that we don't get to have. But I think it's also very much an experience that is imposed on people as the only option for, there are a lot of people working on, like in this pig production, there are certain aspects of it that are automated, but most of it isn't. And this is both on the live side and on the kill side. So the idea, and that's also in Blanchette's book, it's really kind of interesting how much refinement now is going into the production of these animals for to make the kill side as automated as possible, to make it as to make the animals as consistent as possible, so that they can be taken apart by machines, basically. But they're not anywhere near that. The animals are getting more and more consistent and more vulnerable to all kinds of diseases and stuff too, because they are these like isolated, weird industrial beings. And then on the other side, you have
not a raw material at all.
No, definitely not. And but on the this dream of kind of automating the slaughter and the separation of the parts into these nearly 1,000 commodities or something he mentions at one in one particular instance. It's still not automated. It's still there still is variation within that. So it's this kind of
there's
impossible.
There's also a reach towards this automation. Am I saying this correctly?
Automation.
Yeah, exactly. But is that are we going to reach that? Is that something that we should aim for, or what other direction would you suggest that we go?
No, I am not like one of these people who is like, we just need to press on and it's going to get better if we just like automate everything. Because I think there's always going to be human labor involved in these things, and automation tends to make the labor much more difficult for certain people. And so things get cheaper and the labor gets harder and more repetitive. I think that's kind of the way automation works. Yeah. I think that also resonates with a lot of the other works that can be seen here, that also are about platform work and all those things that resonate with like, new ways of labor, and also this technological advancement that promises us smooth operations, but just like hides the human effort more and more. So we need to kind of close down a bit. Is there anything else you want to share about maybe your own work, but maybe also some other works that we should definitely check out at IMPAKT? Yeah, I actually have not had the chance to see the whole thing yet, but the work that's installed right beside where I'm installed, I've heard it a lot because during installation, And I finally got to sit down with it yesterday and see a bit of it, but it's Sasha and Benny. The last names I'm not, but they're
I'll come back to that later.
But their work, which is on exactly this thing of taking the human out of the development of the meter as this like standard kind of measurement for, and that was what I saw of that film was really beautiful, but also like very kind of resonant with so much. So for me, that was that's a work that I know in some weird way because I've been hearing the sound during and I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of it. And I'm to be honest, I haven't had the time to see things yet because I've been installing up until yesterday. So I'm really looking forward to going around and seeing the other stuff.
Excellent. Well, enjoy. Thank you very much for sharing your insight on your work and your process and your research. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you later this afternoon for another IMPAKT TV. And for now, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of IMPAKT 2022.